Let's continue with the pain perception. So, pain from the different viscera of the abdomen and chest is one of the few criteria that can be used for diagnosing visceral inflammation, visceral infection, diseases, and other visceral ailments. So often, the viscera have sensory receptors for no other modalities of sensation besides pain. Also, visceral pain differs from surface pain in several important aspects. Like one of the most important difference between surface pain and visceral pain is that highly localized types of damage to the viscera seldom cause severe pain. For instance, a surgeon can cut the gut entirely in a patient who is awake without causing significant pain. So, conversely, any stimulus that causes diffuse stimulation of pain nerve endings throughout the viscous causes pain that can be severe. For instance, ischemia caused by occluding the blood supply to a large area of gut stimulates many different diffuse pain fibers at the same time and can result in extreme pain. Then causes of true visceral pain. Any stimulus that excites pain nerve endings in diffuse areas of the viscera can cause visceral pain. Such stimuli include ischemia of visceral tissue, chemical damage to the surfaces of viscera, spasms of the smooth muscles of the hollow viscus, then excess distension of a hollow viscus, and stretching of the connective tissue surrounding or within the viscus. Essentially, all visceral pain that originates in the thoracic and abdominal cavities is transmitted through small type C pain fibers and therefore can transmit only the chronic aging suffering type of pain. Then ischemia causes visceral pain in the same way that it does in other tissues. Ischemia causes visceral pain in the same way that it does in other tissues, presumably because of the formation of acidic metabolic end products or tissue degenerative products such as bradykinin, proteolytic enzymes, or others that stimulate pain nerve endings. Then chemical stimuli. On occasion, damaging substances leak from the gastrointestinal tract into the peritoneal cavity. For instance, proteolytic acidic gastric juice may leak through a ruptured gastric or duodenal ulcer. This juice causes widespread digestion of the visceral peritoneum, thus stimulating broad areas of pain fibers. The pain is usually excruciatingly severe. Then spasms of the hollow viscus. Spasm of a portion of a gut, the gallbladder, the bile duct, the ureter, or any other hollow viscus can cause pain, possibly by mechanical stimulation of the pain nerve endings. Another possibility is that the spasm may cause diminished blood flow to the muscle, combined with the muscle's increased metabolic need for nutrients, thus causing severe pain. Often, pain from a spasmic viscus occurs in the form of cramps, and the pain increasing to a high degree of severity and then subsiding. This process continues intermittently, once every few minutes. The intermittent cycles result from periods of contraction of smooth muscles. For instance, each time a peristaltic wave travels along an overly excitable spastic gut, a cramp occurs. The cramping type of pain frequently occurs in persons with appendicitis, gastroenteritis, constipation, menstruation, then parturition, gallbladder disease, or ureter obstruction. Then overdistension of a hollow viscus. Extreme overfilling of a hollow viscus also can result in pain, presumably because overstretch of the tissue themselves. Overdistension can also collapse the blood vessels that encircle the circus or that viscus or that pass into its wall, thus perhaps promoting ischemic pain. Then insensitive viscera. A few visceral areas are almost completely insensitive to pain of any type. These areas include the parenchyma of the liver and the alveoli of the lungs. Yet the liver capsule is extremely sensitive to both direct trauma and stretch, and the bile ducts are also sensitive to pain. In the lungs, even though the alveoli are insensitive, both the bronchi and the parietal pleura are very sensitive to pain. Then localizations of visceral pain like visceral and the parietal pain transmission pathways. Pain from the different viscera is frequently difficult to localize for several reasons. First, the patient's brain does not know from first-hand experience that the different internal organs exist. Therefore, any pain that originates internally can be localized only generally. Then, second, sensations from the abdomen and thorax are transmitted through two pathways to the central nervous system: the true visceral pathway and the parietal pathway. True visceral pain is transmitted via pain sensory fibers within the autonomic nerve bundles, and the sensations are referred to surface areas of the body, often far from the painful organ. Then conversely, parietal sensations are conducted directly into local spinal nerves from the parietal peritoneum, pleura or pericardium, and these sensations are usually localized directly over the painful area. Then localization of referred pain transmitted via visceral pathways. When visceral pain is referred to the surface of the body, the person generally localizes it in the dermatomal segment from which the visceral organ originates in the embryo, not necessarily where the visceral organ now lies. For instance, the heart originates in the neck and upper thorax. So the heart's visceral pain fibers pass upward along the sympathetic sensory nerves and enter the spinal cord between segments C3 and T5. Therefore, pain from the heart is referred to as the side of the neck. Pain from heart is referred to the side of the neck, over the shoulder, over the pectoral muscle, down the arm, and into the substernal area of the upper chest. These are the areas of the body surface that send their own somatosensory nerve fibers into the C3 and 2T5 cord segments. Then most frequently the pain is in the left side rather than on the right, because the left side of the heart is much more frequently involved in coronary diseases than is the right side. The stomach originated approximately from the 7th to 9th thoracic segments of the embryo. Therefore, stomach pain is referred to as the anterior epigastrium above the umbilicus, which is the surface area of the body subserved by the 7th through 9th thoracic segments. Several other surface areas to which visceral pain is referred from other organs, like presenting in general the areas of the embryo from which the respective organ initiates, like heart, esophagus, stomach, liver and gallbladder, pylorus, umbilicus, appendix and small intestine, then right kidney, left kidney, colon and ureter. Surface areas of referred pain from different visceral organs. Then visceral and parietal transmission of pain signals from the appendix. T10, L1, visceral pain, parietal pain. So parietal pathway for transmission of abdominal and thoracic pain. Pain from the viscera is frequently localized to two surface areas of the body at the same time because of the dual transmission of pain through the referred visceral pathway and the direct parietal pathway. This dual transmission from an inflamed appendix, pain impulses first pass from the appendix to visceral pain fibers located within sympathetic nerve bundles and then into the spinal cord at about T10 or T11. This pain is referred to as an area around the umbilicus and is of agent cramping type. Then pain impulses also often originate in the parietal peritoneum, where the inflamed appendix touches or is adherent to the abdominal wall. These impulses cause pain of the sharp type directly over the irritated peritoneum in the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. Some clinical abnormalities of pain and other somatic sensations, like hyperalgesia or hypersensitivity to pain. The pain nerves pathway sometimes becomes excessively excitable, which gives rise to hyperaglasia. Possible causes of hyperaglasia are excessive sensitivity to the brain receptors, which is called primary hyperaglasia, and facilitation of sensory transmission, which is called secondary hyperaglasia. An example of primary hyperaglasia is the extreme sensitivity of sunburned skin, which results from sensitization of the skin pain endings by local tissue products from the burn, perhaps histamine, prostaglandins and others. Secondary hyperaglasia frequently results from lesions in the spinal cord or the thalamus. Then several of the lesions are discussed in subsequent sections. So herpes zoster or shingles. Occasionally herpes virus infects the dorsal root ganglion. This causes severe pain in the dermatosomal segment subserved by the ganglion, thus eliciting a segmental type of pain that circles halfway around the body. This disease is called herpes zoster or shingles because of the skin eruption that often ensures. The cause of pain is presumably infection of the pain neuronal cells in the dorsal root ganglion by the virus. In addition to causing pain, the virus is carried by neuronal cytoplasmic flow outward through the neuronal peripheral axons to their cutaneous origins. Here, the virus causes a rash that vesiculates within a few days and then crusts over within another few days. All of this occurring within the dermatomal area served by the infected dorsal root. Then, TIC doublorx. Lancinating or stabbing type of pain occasionally occurs in some people over one side of the face in the sensory distribution related area or part of the area of the fifth or ninth nerves. This phenomenon is called tic douloronix or trigeminal neuralgia or glossopharyngeal neuralgia. The pain feels like sudden electric shocks and it may appear for only a few seconds at a time or may be almost continuous. Often it is set off by exceedingly sensitive trigger areas on the surface of face, in the mouth or inside the throat, almost always by a mechanosensitive receptive stimulator rather than a pain stimulus. For instance, when the patient swallows a bolus of food, as the food touches the tonsil, it might set off a severe lancinating pain in the mandibular portion of the fifth nerve. The pain of the TIC doulourx can usually be blocked by surgically cutting the peripheral nerve from the hypersensitive area. The sensory portion of the fifth nerve is often sectioned immediately inside the cranium, where the motor and sensory roots of the fifth nerve separates from each other, so the motor portions which are necessary for many jaw movements can be spread while the sensory elements are destroyed. This operation leaves the side of the face anesthetic, which may be annoying. Furthermore, sometimes the operation is unsuccessful, indicating that the lesion that caused the pain might be in the sensory nucleus in the brainstem and not in the peripheral nerves. So, next, Brown-Séquard syndrome. If the spinal cord is transected entirely, all sensations and motor functions distal to the segment of transection are blocked. But if the spinal cord is transected on only one side, the Brown-Séquard syndrome occurs. The effects of such transection can be predicted from knowledge of the cord fiber transects, and all motor functions are blocked on the side of transection in all segments below the levels of transection. Yet only some of the modalities of sensation are lost on the transected side and others are lost in the opposite side. So, some cross-section of spinal cord showing principal ascending tracts on the right and principal descending tracts on the left. We could see regions like ascending tracts: fasciculus, gracilis, fasciculus, cutaneous, dorsal, spinocerebellar, lateral spinothalamic, ventral spinocerebellar, spinotectal, ventral spinothalamic, vestibulospinal, then ventral corticospinal, tectospinal, olivospinal, rubrospinal region, then lateral corticospinal, descending tracts, etc. are seen. Then sensations of pain, heat and cold sensations served by the spinothalamic pathway are lost on the opposite side of the body in all dermatomes, 2 to 6 segments below the level of the transection. By contrast, the sensations that are transmitted only in the dorsal and dorsolateral columns, kinesthetic and position sensations, vibration sensation, discrete localization and 2-point discrimination are lost on the side of transection in all dermatomes below the level of transection. Discrete light touch is impaired on the side of the transection because the principal pathway for the transmission of light touch, the dorsal column, is transected. That is, the fibers in this column do not cross to the opposite side until they reach the medulla of the brain. Then crude touch, which is poorly localized, still persists because of partial transmission in the opposite spinothalamic tract. Then thermal sensations, thermal receptors and their excitation. The human being can perceive different gradations of cold and heat, from freezing cold to cool to indifferent to warm to hot to burning hot. Thermal gradations are discriminated by at least three types of sensory receptors like cold receptors, warmth receptors, and pain receptors. The pain receptors are stimulated only by extreme degrees of heat or cold and therefore are responsible along with the cold and warmth receptors for freezing cold and burning hot sensations. The cold and warmth receptors are located immediately under the skin at discrete separate spots. Most areas of the body have 3 to 10 times as many cold spots as warmth spots, and the number in different areas of the body varies from 15 to 25 cold spots per centimeter in the lips to 3 to 5 cold spots per centimeter on the finger to less than 1 cold spot per centimeter square in some broad surface areas of the trunk. Although physiological tests show that the existence of distinctive warmth nerve endings is quite certain, they have not been identified histologically. They are presumed to be free nerve endings because warmth signals are transmitted mainly over type C nerve fibers at transmission velocities of only 0.4 to 2 meter per second. A definitive cold receptor has been identified. It is a special small type A delta myelinated nerve ending that branches several times, the tips of which protrude into the bottom surface of basal epidermal cells. Then signals are transmitted from these receptors via type A delta nerve fibers at velocities of about 20 meter per second. Some cold sensations are believed to be transmitted in type C nerve fibers as well, which suggests that some free nerve endings also might function as cold receptors. Then stimulation of thermal receptors. Sensations of cold, cool, indifferent, warm, and hot. The effects of different temperatures on the response of 4 types of nerve fibers: a pain fiber stimulated by cold, a cold fiber, a warmth fiber, and a pain fiber stimulated by heat. Not especially that these fibers respond differently at different levels of temperature. For instance, in very cold region, only the cold pain fibers are stimulated. If the skin becomes even colder so that it nearly freezes or actually does freeze, the fibers cannot be stimulated. As the temperature rises to plus 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, the cold pain impulses cease, but the cold receptors begin to be stimulated, reaching peak stimulation at about 25-4 degrees Celsius and fading out slightly above 14 degrees Celsius. Above about 13 degrees Celsius, the warmth receptors, or 30 degrees Celsius, the warmth receptors begin to be stimulated, but this also fades out at about 49 degrees Celsius. Finally, at about 45 degrees Celsius, the heat pain fibers begin to be stimulated by heat. And paradoxically, some of the cold fibers begin to be stimulated again, possibly because the damage to the cold endings caused by the excessive heat. One can understand that a person determines the different gradations of gradual thermal sensations by the relative degrees of stimulation of the different types of endings. One can also understand why extreme degrees of both cold and heat can be painful, and why both the sensations, when intense enough, may give almost the same quality of sensation, that is, freezing cold and burning hot sensations feel almost alike. And stimulatory effects of raising and falling temperature, adaptation of thermal receptors. When a cold receptor is suddenly subjected to an abrupt fall in temperature, it becomes strongly stimulated at first, but the stimulation fades rapidly during the first few seconds and progressively more slowly during the next 30 minutes or more. In other words, the receptor adapts to a great extent but never 100%. Thus, it is evident that the internal senses respond markedly to changes in temperature in addition to being able to respond to steady states of temperature. This means that when the temperature of a skin is actively falling, a person feels much colder than when the temperature remains cold at the same level. Conversely, if the temperature is actively rising, the person feels much warmer than he or she would be at the same temperature if it were constant. The response to changes in temperature explains the extreme degree of heat one feels on first entering a tub of hot water and extreme degree of cold felt on going from a heated room to the out of doors on a cold day. Then, mechanism of stimulation of thermal receptors. It is believed that the cold and warmth receptors are stimulated by changes in their metabolic rates, and that these changes result from the fact that temperatures alter the rate of intracellular chemical reactions more than twofold for each 10 degrees Celsius change. In other words, thermal detection probably results not from direct physical effects of heat or cold on the nerve endings, but from chemical stimulation of the endings as modified by temperature. Then, spatial summation of thermal sensations. Because the number of cold or warm endings in any one surface area of body is slight, it is difficult to judge gradations of temperature when small skin areas are stimulated. However, when a large skin area is stimulated all at once, the thermal signals from the entire area summate. For instance, rapid change in temperature as little as 0.01 degrees Celsius can be detected if this change affects the entire surface of the body simultaneously. Conversely, temperature changes 100 times as great often will not be detected when the affected skin area is only 1 centimeter square in size. Then, transmission of thermal signals in the nerve system. In general, thermal signals are transmitted in pathways parallel to those of pain signals. Upon entering the spinal cord, the signals travel for a few segments upward or downward in the tract of Lycia and terminate mainly in laminae 1, 2, and 3 of the dorsal horns, the same as for pain. After a small amount of processing by one or more cold neurons, the signals enter long ascending thermal fibers that cross to the opposite anterolateral sensory tract and terminate in both the reticular areas of the brainstem and the ventrobasal complex of the thalamus. A few thermal signals are also relayed to the cerebral somatic sensory cortex from the ventrobasal complex. Occasionally, a neuron in cortical somatic sensory area first has been found by microelectrode studies to be directly responsive to either cold or warm stimuli on a specific area of the skin. However, removal of the entire cortical postcentral gyrus in the human being reduces but does not abolish the ability to distinguish gradations of temperature. Next topic, somatosensory cortex, which will be discussed with the help of next video.